we go. All right. It is still 7:05, and I'm calling this meeting to order. All right. So we'll do roll call. Perfect. We have Commissioner Redmond. Here. And Commissioner Lates.
Here.
Commissioner Broadnax.
Here.
Commissioner Gill.
Here.
Commissioner Edwards.
Here.
And we're anticipating Commissioner Miller, but, we'll just keep moving. And we have an agenda to approve. Is there a motion to approve this evening's agenda?
I'll make a motion.
All right. We have a motion, and do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, put it forward by Gill, seconded by Commissioner Broadnax. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All righty. We've got our motion. And also our agenda from our last meeting. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes and the agenda from last week, or last time we were together?
Mm-hmm.
We have a motion to accept that.
So tonight,
No, don't speak out of it once.
we had tabled the June 22nd
We tabled the
minutes.
June- okay.
So I think we're looking
should-
at those to
We're looking at
begin.
those. Thank you very much, staff. Do we have a motion to approve the June 22nd minutes?
I'll make a motion.
All right, again, Commissioner Lakes, thank you very much. And do we have a second on that?
I will second that.
Commissioner Edwards. And I wasn't, we had a couple of people not here for that one, didn't we?
Yeah,
Let's see, it was Molly and Ted were not here.
Okay. Can Commissioner Redmond, do we need to?
You can always vote on minutes, it doesn't matter, but if you feel more comfortable, you can abstain if you weren't here.
Okay. I always forget that rule. But anyway, all right, well, we have our motion and it's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all righty.
And I abstain.
And Commissioner Redmond has abstained. Thank you very much. And then continuing on for our minutes from last time we were together.
I move approval.
Commissioner Redmond moves approval. Do we have a second? Thank you, Commissioner Broadnax. And I'm going to abstain because I was not here.
I'm going to abstain as well.
All right, Commissioner Gill
As will I.
and Commissioner Edwards. So staff, can we vote with the three? We've got 3 abstentions and 3, or
I think that's a quorum.
It's a tie?
great.
3's a majority.
We'll be fine.
Okay, then we'll go ahead. So, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, cool. Well, and that brings us on to continued unfinished business with our climate mitigation plan. Oh, and actually, I do see, sorry, now that I'm looking at things. Oh, never mind, I just am looking at wrong. Ignore me, just ignore me. Staff, our unfinished business with the climate mitigation plan and our green building code.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. So I'll make the introduction here. So we are continuing our discussion on the climate mitigation planning efforts. So as you recall, the Environmental Commission and our Green Team have chosen these 2 items as our climate action items that we'll take under the Gold Leaf Pilot Project. And to start, we were beginning climate mitigation planning with some education and outreach. And we have been fortunate enough to have Taylor Matheson with us for the last 2 months, I believe, interning with us as part of MPCA. They were able to place interns with all of the Gold Leaf pilot cities, which there are 11 in one tribal nation, and so Taylor has been a great help doing some research for us. So she's going to continue her research and updates with our outreach and some additional information she put together on some EV-ready charging station regulations. So welcome, Taylor.
Thank you. So our last 2 outreach events went pretty well. We went to July Celebrate Summer in Edgerton Park, and that's where all of these pictures were taken. We unfortunately did not get any at National Night Out. But yeah, that went really well. It was really hot though. at National Night Out. It was a little slower because it was like pouring, and we just tabled that one event at, can you remind me of the?
That was
home
at
park?
Rolling Hills Manufactured Home Park, and there's about 250 homes there. We've done some energy outreach there in the past, and they've been very receptive to having us back to do that. And Taylor will go into our partner that we worked with that night.
Yeah, so Gerardo Roca was kind enough to join me there. He's the bilingual outreach specialist from the Center for Energy and Environment. And yeah, that was kind of helpful because there was a mix of English and Spanish speakers. But yeah, it went well.
Excuse the blurry photo here, but we wanted to give you an update on some of the outreach we're doing in our newsletters and on social media. So we started a newsletter article. It was by our city council member Juniman, and that was during the July Maplewood Living. She touched on the Green Step cities, how we're a Green Step Step 5, and what's next, and then it kind of explained this Gold Leaf project and the climate actions that we're taking, and do your part and announce the survey in that July edition. And then now in August we had this article talking about our Keep Maplewood Cool, our tagline here, with a QR code that brings you right to the survey that we've been promoting during all these outreach efforts. And then social media, we've been posting on our Facebook and Instagram accounts. And this is one, just kind of short and sweet. Add your voice, help shape the City of Maplewood's first climate mitigation action plan. Complete the survey by the end of August, and you will be eligible for a drawing for 2 $50 gift cards. So we did include that prize as a little incentive. And it seems to have promoted some, or I should say drawn some people towards the survey because, and you'll see on this next survey, our survey results to date.
So we have had quite an increase in responses. As you can see from the last time, we increased a little bit. We're over 3/4 that agree or completely agree with this statement. And pretty much the same layout for this statement as well. So looking pretty good. And then we finally had someone 25 or younger complete the survey. It's just one person, but we're working on it. We also have had more ethnicities respond, which is good. We have better demographics here. And then we have also been working on survey translation, so that will hopefully increase in the future as well.
So we did hear from our Environmental Commission as well as our Park Commission that we should promote the survey in other languages, and Spanish is first language for many, like at the Rolling Hills Manufactured Home Park. We had good success working with that bilingual outreach coordinator, being able to speak the language, which is their first language. And then also Hmong, we know we have a large Hmong population in Maplewood. So we did have the survey translated by a translation company, but since then have been determining how best to put that together. So we're still kind of working on that. It's, do you have 3 separate surveys in different languages, and then you have to decipher the results individually? Do you have them all together with all 3 languages on there, but then when they respond, it'll just be in, so it got a little bit more complicated than just paying someone to translate it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But we'll be working on that and hope to have that released in the next 2 weeks, I'd say.
Real quick question, how long is the survey going up for?
We'll have that probably the end of the year or longer, but that incentive, the $50 gift cards, to submit your responses by end of August.
And just, is there a way to, since it is going through the end of the year, when you do get those translations in place, is there a way to verify email to make sure that multiple responses aren't being received from someone who may have completed the survey in English and then also in one of the translated, or is that just kind of not negligible enough to be of a concern?
Boy, I'll have to get back to you on that one. So, well, we can verify email addresses, but when they're in different languages, I apologize. I'm going to pause on that one. And we have someone in the know in the audience.
Hi, Molly Miller. We have some free software that I can come and talk to you about that actually translate it for the schools into their own, and then you can reply in English, but it'll come to them in their own language. And then there's also some official translators that will do it for cities for free. I can give those to you after.
Oh, excellent. And then, Google Forms, which is the survey platform we have it on, they have a translation opportunity too, but so looking into all those. But yes, we will verify emails. Yes.
Thank you.
So that's our summary. And moving forward, we are still working on budget for the actual planning process, which we hope to roll out next year. And that would include putting together a task force of sorts, or a steering committee made up of probably our members of the Environmental Commission, City Council, and several stakeholders within the city, and starting to compile all the data and work on formulating a draft actual plan for climate mitigation and how the city can work on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So that'll be a project for next year. Any questions of Taylor or myself on the climate mitigation planning? Or any suggestions moving forward until the end of the year? We do have one outreach opportunity we should be attending on Wednesday night, and I'll get to that in the staff presentations, but it's the last summer celebration. However, due to the heat, they might cancel that. So,
Yeah.
but we'll look for other opportunities, wherever we can to do outreach and get more feedback on the survey.
Well, thank you very much for getting out there in this heat and just sweating it out and getting the word out on the survey. It's really greatly appreciated.
Oh, and I should also mention, just today, Commissioner Redmond was approached by a professor who has a class that would be interested in working on putting together some communication pieces for our mitigation planning efforts. So we'll update you on that further. So that'll be like within the next 2 months.
One question. I know I wasn't part of these discussions last meeting, but regarding the gift cards, would there be an opportunity to provide another $50 gift card once the survey is available in Hmong or Spanish?
All right. Yeah, that's not a lot of money, so we'll look at that opportunity. Yeah. You're right. Good suggestion.
That's all I had. Looks great.
Any other questions or comments on the survey? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. All right, so I'll again make the introduction here. The Green Building Code, this was the second climate action that the city has chosen to work on as part of our Gold Leaf pilot project. And Taylor has been doing research on various cities' EV requirements, just so we can compare notes, as well as other Green Building Code opportunities. So she's presented that over the last few months. But we have some additional information, particularly of cities that are not within the state. So take it away, Taylor.
Great, thank you. So I looked into the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry requirements that went into effect on July 1st, and that will require the building code to regulate the minimum number of the parking spaces, and we'll just go over some definitions quick. So the spaces are different based on electric vehicle capable versus with a charging station and versus electric vehicle ready. So the electric vehicle capable spaces just require that there are certain electrical infrastructures installed. The charging station is obviously when the actual charger is installed, and then the electric vehicle ready spaces are, they have certain electrical things installed above the capable space. And then they are requiring a space for every 4 or 10 parking spaces based on the type of structure and based on EV ready versus EV capable and EV charging station.
So these are actual requirements that will go into the building code. So now any new construction will have to comply with this, you know. And it's new, so we tried to find as much information as we could. And, you know, it says it goes into effect July 1st, but I don't know, I haven't really seen it in the building code. So, and even our building official wasn't that familiar with it. So still doing a little research there. So when we do come up with some standards for if we go about doing EV charging, you know, we were going to do the regulations for the buildings that were funded or owned by the city.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to want to make sure and review this and make it, you know, more a greater requirement because they already have to do this. Yeah. So we'll look into that further. But this is great news. Any comments on this new requirement or any new insights someone might have?
So it is just for the funded by the city buildings, not if it's a, you know, commercial person doing it on their own or their company doing, is that true?
So this is actual statewide, so it will be in the building code and it will be any new building.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the laws do not allow a city to set higher standards than the actual building code,
Okay.
except for, you know, buildings which receive funding or are owned by the city or publicly owned. So we didn't really have the capability. Well, I don't know about EV charging. I do know about like making a green building. So, yes, this will be throughout the state a
Okay.
requirement now.
Nice.
I see some puzzled looks at this requirement here. You can see some are EV ready requirements and some are EV capable. So EV ready, of course, is just making sure that the electric or cables are installed under the parking area to eventually make it into, to eventually install a charging station. All right, we'll keep tracking this and give you more information on that later.
All right, so I have Minneapolis to go over first, and then I'll move into the non-Minnesota cities. So Minneapolis's requirements is based off of residential buildings, based on how many units there are. So 1 to 9 units need to have at least one level 2 charging space, and then the remaining enclosed spaces must support level 1 charging. And then 10% of spaces in 10 or more unit buildings need to be capable of level 2 charging stations. So don't need a charger, but capable. And hotels and offices have certain requirements, with 10% of spaces having level 2 charging stations and 20% capable of supporting those charging stations. And then any other non-residential off-street parking with 20 or more spaces, 5% have to have level 2 charging stations, an additional 5% need to be EV ready to support the level 2 stations.
And Taylor, this is for any construction in Minneapolis, right? Not necessarily
I believe.
city funded?
I believe so.
Yes, that is true. Okay. So I thought there was some challenges to that, but apparently they're making it work. Okay, well, that's good to know.
So Issaquah, Washington is based off of just multifamily residential and non-residential, where the multifamily residential have certain requirements for like the base level of 10% of spaces, and then existing buildings need to have 20% EV-ready spaces, and new buildings need to have 30% of spaces being EV-ready. Non-residential need to have 5% of parking spaces with charging stations and 10% EV-ready. Madison, Wisconsin, which what I read was a draft for their requirements. 50% of spaces need to be capable of electric vehicle charging, and for every 50 EV-ready spaces, at least one must be accessible, which a lot of these cities are requiring for there to be both EV-ready or charging station and accessible, which is good. For residential with 6 or more spaces, they need to be EV-ready for level 2 charging stations in at least 10%. And in commercial, they need to be EV-ready for level 2 charging stations in at least 5% of spaces. Menlo Park, California, in new construction of 10,000 square feet or more, 15% need to be EV-ready, 10% need to have the charging stations installed. And then for additions and alterations of the certain square footage, the 10,000 to 25,000 square feet need 5% of EV-ready spaces, and 25,000 square feet or more need 10% EV-ready. Mountain Lake Terrace, Washington. These are kind of more specific requirements, which was interesting. Multi-household residential need at least 10% of spaces having charging stations, and then the lodging and office and municipal infrastructure need at least 3%, and then retail and those types of buildings need to have at least 1%. And then they also require the one accessible EV station per 50 spaces. St. Louis, Missouri, in single-family buildings need to have at least one EV-ready space per unit, and multifamily and non-residential buildings for 5 to 20 spaces need at least one EV-ready and do not require any stations installed as of right now. 21 to 49 spaces, 2 EV-ready and 1 charging station space, and 50 or more need 5% EV-ready and 2% charging stations. Seattle, Washington, the residential private parking, they need to have at least 1 EV-ready space or area, and multifamily buildings with surface parking, 1 to 6 spaces, all must be EV ready, which is good. 7 to 25 spaces, at least 6 need to be EV ready. 25 or more need to have at least 20% EV ready. And then non-residential requires 10% of spaces be EV ready. And they also require the accessible space to be ready as well. And then the New Jersey state requirements with 5 or more unit dwellings with off-street parking, they kind of go in like a 6-year plan. So 15% have to be EV ready at first, and then 5% of that 15% needs charging stations installed. And then within 3 years, another 5% need to be installed. And within 6 years, the final 5% need to be installed. So they kind of give some leeway there, which could be good or bad, I guess. They also require 5% having to be in accessible parking spaces. And then they cover any parking structure not falling under the 5 or more unit dwelling with 1 to 50 spaces, having 1 EV ready space, and then going up pretty much just 1 space per 50 spaces, and then with the 101 to 150 spaces, having at least 1 accessible space as well.
I think what we see there is everything across the board. It was interesting to see how some required actual single families, new developments, to have them. And then in New Jersey, that staggered time frame, I think, would be challenging to try to enforce. But it does seem that some of the other states are a little further ahead, or more requirements for EV charging. So thanks for that research, and we would like to thank Ted Redmond, Pale Blue Dot, for sending us those details. Any questions on, so we're just using all this, like filling our head with knowledge on what the city of Maplewood could do. Any insights, thoughts on when we do start to write up our own EV charging requirements?
I'm just looking at a lot of the various cities and places that you had chosen, and were any option, Maplewood is a very interesting suburb, we'll leave it at that, and were you able to find any information on cities out of state that have similar population demographics, as far as family income size or the ethnic diversity of the city, and what their EV requirements are?
I don't think we researched to that degree, except for maybe the Minnesota cities, and maybe the most similar, like, not that they're that similar, but suburbs like St. Louis Park, Edina, of course, nothing like Maplewood, but nonetheless suburbs. So, no, not to that extent, countrywide.
I didn't memorize the new building code requirements, but something I didn't think about is including accessibility into EV requirements. So I think that should be a point of the cities as well.
I have more of a curiosity question. If you've run across in your research at all, maybe any additional underlying data of maybe some of the data that might have gone into their code building, like projections of anticipated EV adoption rates, or their projection for growth for sales that might be driving these percentages that they've used, because Madison at 50% and some of these others at 5% is a pretty big swing, with more of them sitting at those lower ends. So I'd just be curious if you've seen anything like that, or any data sources that might be useful as we start to to look at our population and our projected, growth of EV adoption.
I think that's a very important aspect of doing our research. We didn't get into it that much, but I think once we start focusing on our own regulations, we can look at experts in the area of EV, within the metropolitan area. What's the projection of these vehicles coming online? So that's a very good point for additional research into what would work here and what's actually needed.
I can share a little bit. So there's a few different ways you can think about it. One is projected if we don't do anything. And the other is projected based on some of the new incentives that have just rolled out in the last year. And then the third is projected for what we need to accomplish. So those are kind of three different levels. But projected if we don't do anything, there's kind of a range because everybody's anticipating, looking at their little glass ball. What do you call that?
Looking, yeah, crystal ball.
Yeah, crystal ball. Yeah, that was close.
Yeah.
So, the ranges that I've typically seen for Midwest are like by 2030, 2035, 7.5% to 15% of rolling stock, so cars that are actually out on the road being EV. I think that's actually probably, I think I would bet 15% if we don't do anything. And then I think with incentives, we can nudge that up a little bit. But if we start looking at what we need to accomplish in order to hit our GHG needs globally and as a country, I think we're looking probably more like, let's try to get 30% rolling stock by 2030. So a pretty aggressive growth. Don't know if we can hit that, but that's, I think. Once you start thinking about how many will we have, which is part of the reason for EV ready. The ability to say, well, we know what we want to accomplish. We can anticipate what will happen no matter what. How do we make both of those things happen? The other thing I'll throw out too is that I think having a very serious focus on multifamily housing is really important because at the very least, PHEV is a real thing. I drove a PHEV here today. I don't use gas on a day-to-day basis. I plug it in when I go home. I just need a trickle charge for it, and I can get 50 miles a day out of the thing. And we bought that specific vehicle because it's the only one that has that capacity, but that's going to change really quickly. So I think we'll see more and more folks that at least have PHEV. So making sure that we can accommodate multifamily housing to support, at the very least, that, I think is pretty important. So, a couple thoughts.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Redmond. Any other questions or comments on, what Maplewood can do for getting residents EV ready?
All right, so thank you for that research, Taylor. And we'll just move on now to the second portion of our Green Building Code discussion. So just as a reminder, the City of Maplewood did adopt its Green Building Code in 2013. So we've had a couple of years now and several buildings built under that code. It is based on the 2012 International Green Construction Code. So this is a national code that any city can adopt and somewhat modify based on your needs. You can choose certain sections and exempt certain sections. And so that's for the commercial piece, and then the residential projects fall under the ICC 700, which ours is the 2008 version. And one thing that was pointed out to me by our building official is that, at least here in Minnesota, we haven't seen any other cities adopt this International Green Construction Code besides Maplewood. So that's one of the reasons it's causing some issue here with our builders. But the code, they do look at this, the international codes, every 3 years and update them. So it's been through 3 versions since 2012, so there's been a lot of changes. And So reviewing one code to the next code to the next code, I mean, this code is huge with several sections, and they do not offer a document that actually like has a red line or anything like that. So that was a little challenging. Spent a lot of time digging into that. But what another thing that I was told by our building official is that, you know, each time they come up with new changes, it's based on maybe a particular city's experience with the code and, you know, how they want it modified. So do those changes actually meet the city of Maplewood's, you know, intent or goals? So with each of these changes, maybe it's just getting further away from what we intended. So I did mention this in the beginning when I had interviewed the building official. And keep in mind that the code was adopted under a previous building official, and this is Randy Johnson now is well, I think he's been on board here 2 or 3 years, so not that new, but wasn't, you know, the one who spearheaded adopting the green construction code. So, you know, he's having to work in this code where not having the background information and trying to explain to many of the developers and so forth how this works when, you know, you don't have a full understanding yourself has been challenging. But here are the things that he said have been difficult in the time he's been here. It's difficult to enforce. There's a lot of requirements for assessments and studies, you know, that he doesn't quite know how to explain to the developers. As an example, this life cycle assessment requirement is confusing. It's difficult to work with from a design standpoint. Many of the architects, you know, aren't familiar with this code. They're more familiar with like LEED certification and so forth. And some of the developers have expressed concern that the building under the code costs more money, so they ultimately ask for additional public funding to reduce the number of units, you know, which is kind of counterintuitive to what we're trying to gain, you know, affordable housing here at the same time as green building code, and, you know, maybe we're putting up barriers to building here with this code. Multifamily residential buildings of 4 stories or less are exempt from the code, which that's all we're seeing in Maplewood. You know, we don't have 6-story multifamily buildings, but there were 2 multifamily buildings that I'm aware of that were constructed under the code. But they were under our old building official, and we're not quite sure how that has all kind of happened. But there's been, as an example, that new, I think it's senior housing, I think they're calling it London, well, it's on London Lane where the old fire station was. They were exempt from this code because they were only 3 stories. So, and it has no electric vehicle charging station or renewable energy requirements, at least in that 2012 code. So those were the issues that were expressed to me. And so I did a comparison of some of these key factors to the 2021 International Construction Code. And here, residential buildings 3 stories and less are exempt. So they reduced it by 1 story. There are EV parking spacing requirements. Went over this last month. You can see commercial requiring 4% EV parking spaces for 20 or more on-site vehicle parking spaces, and 8% EV-ready parking spaces designated to employee-only parking. And, you know, that seems pretty minimal compared to the standards that we saw a moment ago with Taylor's research. And then multifamily, 20% EV-ready parking spaces for 10 or more on-site vehicle parking spaces. So not even EV charging, just EV-ready. And then they do now have on-site photovoltaic system requirements, so not less than 2 watts per square foot, multiplied by the horizontal projection of the gross roof area over conditioned space and semi-heated spaces. So they have added some additional green elements that cities can choose to adopt as part of this code. So in order to, you know, move forward, do we adopt the 2021 code, or do we drop the Green Construction Code altogether and start fresh? I'll
So-
pause for a question.
Yes. Is there any kind of, at least in the past, was there any kind of workshop or education seminar put together for developers regarding the green code and how to actually build things according to it? Where, because if they're having difficulties, I mean, has there been any kind of education on that?
Well, I do know that when it was rolled out, our previous building official was very proactive in the building official, whatever, world. And he was doing, presentations to many of the cities and talking about how this code, would be easy for any city to adopt. So I do know there was a lot of outreach, at least to other organizations. And then, we had, when we first rolled out the code, the city of Maplewood actually constructed, the South Fire Station was the first building constructed. So, we kind of use that as some examples of how it can be done to developers. But, that was 2013. And we really haven't done much since then, except, when there is a building with that is requesting city funding, then I guess the education begins.
I mean, that could be something that, in order to receive that funding, they have to just go through some sort of educational workshop or something, and then in order to receive those funds for whatever construction, that would be one possibility for increased use of the modified building codes.
I was just wondering if I could have a brief synopsis on the difference between LEED certification and this green building code. I know, like, the certification you're striving for certification versus, like, is it design standard versus built standard, or I guess what's the main difference between the two?
Commissioner Redmond?
I can give a quick sort of sense of it. First of all, there's a distinct difference between code versus like LEED, which is a certification standard in that code is a requirement and you set forth specific requirements, whereas LEED or other certification standards usually have kind of a build your own adventure kind of menu. And then you're aiming to get specific points in order to reach different levels, of which certain actions are a requirement just to become certified, and then you try to add more points later on. But it's not enforceable by code, although if a city were to adopt it under whatever legal mechanism the city has to adopt it, then it would be enforceable to that extent. In terms of the kinds of things that, like a green building code versus, say, LEED are trying to support, tend to be similar. There might be slight nuance, things like low VOC materials for indoor air quality, or maybe some of those things are a little bit more prevalent in certifications and a little less prevalent in code. The codes have a tendency of focusing more on sort of durable infrastructure as opposed to like materials that can be changed out rapidly in an interior renovation kind of a thing. But in general, I mean, they tend to be aiming in a similar direction. Building code, the green code or other code structures have a tendency of being a little bit more specific on energy demand than LEED. But so aside from those sort of nuances, they're not dissimilar. So I find it kind of comes down to what a community ultimately wants to do out of it. If you the advantage I think that the green building code has is that it actually can be integrated into the rest of the code system so that they relate to each other. The fire code, the mechanical code, the base building code, green building code all relate to each other because it's all one system, as opposed to LEED doesn't relate to code at all because it's not a code, right? But more people are familiar with it because lots of folks have used LEED for a while. So.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Redmond. Commissioner Miller.
And I do think that I agree with you, and want to kind of piggyback off of what you said about the education purpose for the building community. Because they do have to be certified in these other areas, like building fire, all that stuff. It might be something that they just have to do. Like, it might not have to come through the city at all, because that's something they have to do in order to build here. Also, I actually just had a question, and I was wondering, how they were saying EV parking spaces for 4 stories, and, that doesn't really apply to us, and now it's possibly 3. Would it be a little bit more feasible if you did percentage of capacity of those buildings? Because you could have a sprawling 3-story building and never have to do anything, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Like, if it's like the mall or something and they have a capacity of so many, they should have so many, just like you do for some other kinds of parking spaces. Anyway, that was just my thought about that, the percentage of capacity in a building, not necessarily how tall it is.
Can we go back to the Minnesota state standard, that screen, just to see what that looks like?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, was it all the way back there?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, there.
Oh, there it is.
There we go.
So if this is required by the state, and are we looking to be more than this requirement, that what the state is requiring for the city of Maplewood? Am I clear on that?
For city-funded or owned buildings, we could.
First, okay, because the state one doesn't, what Molly was saying, they don't have, it just says more than 4 units. It doesn't say 3 stories or 2 stories or 4 stories. It's only for the ready, EV ready space it says for every 4 parking spaces, one EV ready space. I'm just wondering if we go off more of what the state is talking about, then it's more enforceable, or I'm just looking at this thinking that this is good, and if we could work from this and not add too much more onto it, you know what I mean? Not make it be so confusing and complicated, it might be easier.
I think what Commissioner Miller was referring to is how the Green Building Code, 3 stories or less, multifamily is exempt from the actual Green Building Code.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you're referring to there. And then as far as requiring EV parking spaces dependent on the overall number of units, it could be a case where a multifamily building, such as a assisted senior living, a lot of those will ask for reduced parking, because their residents aren't driving. So, well, that's a bad example. But let's say that a development got a variance or had shared parking or whatever the case might be. You always want to base it on the number of required spaces that they have, not the number of units that they have, because they could have more units than they're furnishing parking spaces. I don't know, we're getting in the weeds, I'm sorry.
Well, more of a comment. So with this screen that's up here, I was squinting at it earlier because I'm not up to date on the exact changes that are coming out of Minnesota this year. There was a lot, and so stuff that relates to building code, I have not been paying that close attention to. But it confuses me because this is typically zoning, not building code. So that's why I was squinting. Like, I'm trying to figure out, how does this fit into the Minnesota State Building Code?
Right.
Because parking is not building code. Because it's not a building, it's usually on, it might be under a building, in which case the shell that, encloses it is a building, but typically the parking requirements are driven by zoning ordinance, which is city, not state. So that's one comment that I have about that. And then the other thought is, so depending in terms of this other sort of expansion of the conversation, because one part of the conversation is all about EV, the other is about everything else. Energy efficiency, emissions, all that sort of stuff. And so if the state gets their act together and really drives a very high level energy efficiency and emissions reduction requirements, then I think, yeah, we'd be well suited to just follow the state. But I don't know exactly where they're at with that. Cities have been poking the state to take action for 15, 20 years to really get aggressive.
I think cities have a little bit more capacity to put grants in than the state does.
Yeah.
I was just, as a framework to use this as a framework to build off of it is what I was thinking of, and not make it be too complicated. Because then it's easier to enforce and easier to let them know, let the builders know what is required to do a green building.
Agree. So, these buttons are goofy.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I will pick up where I left off here, which was pointing out that, yes, so with adopting the updated green construction code, if the city were to do that, I have been informed that, there's sections that we can add or exempt, like, the number of stories being exempt, things like that. But you can't modify the text. So, there's just so much text in there that might not make sense for the city. And when in discussions with the building official on the 2021 code, he's kind of had the same, he hasn't memorized the code or looked at it that thoroughly, but had the same concerns about that code being difficult to enforce and that it's confusing. And he recommended that we drop the green construction code and draft a new sustainable building code which meets the city's energy and climate goals. So that's, a whole new ball game here. So with that said, I did, some quick research again with our Green Step cities. I kind of outlined in your staff report the best practice for green building codes, and they have several cities and several examples, and Taylor has done the research on that as well. But the two that kind of stuck out as just seeming to be the easiest to use and most understandable were St. Paul and Edina, which have similar codes. And I'll just go over them, and then we can just talk about next steps and, where we want to go here. I did include both of those codes, which are only like, 2 or 3 pages long, as opposed to, this book, this Green Construction Code book. But in the city of St. Paul, their policy covers new construction or major renovations of facilities owned or operated by the city of St. Paul or the HRA, or that the city or HRA are or will become the sole tenant, and any facility receiving more than $200,000 of city funding. So you can see this is only looking at those buildings that receive some sort of funding from the city. And it covers municipal, commercial, multifamily, and single family, industrial and parking developments. And it covers planning, design, construction, and commissioning of new buildings or additions if they include installations of new mechanical, ventilation, or cooling systems. So, if they're renovating a building, it would have to comply with their code. And then once again here, they don't actually outline like in a code form, but they say, we would like to see these buildings certified under one of these programs. And they list LEED, either the silver, gold, or platinum, the Minnesota B3, which is the energy program, green communities, and then they also include some EV charging capability requirements in in their code. And then in Edina, their policy covers developments that receive city funding or land use incentives. So I think that's key here is land use incentives. You know, what triggers that? And I think they've said like as a planned unit development, you know, so allowing for smaller lots if it's a planned unit development, things like that. So that's something new. Municipal, commercial, multifamily, single-family, industrial, and parking developments. And additions of greater than 10,000 square feet for non-municipal and 2,500 square feet for municipal. And then installation of replacement of HVAC systems in those buildings. And then here again, they don't have specific code details, but outline the certification process, which, you know, does allow flexibility with the designer and developers and architects, you know, to choose a certification that works for them, and then work with the building official, you know, to make sure that the building is constructed under that. LEED, silver, gold, or platinum, the Minnesota B3, green communities, and then they also have EV charging capability for 15% of parking spaces. So I think maybe they kind of mirrored their codes after each other because they're quite similar. But they're real simple, easy to read, and you know they're using certifications that are well known and represented here in Minnesota, and builders have built under them. So that is the extent of our research and review to date. Kind of seems like you start spinning your wheel. You know, you think you're going one direction, and then there's a hard stop, and you have to turn around and go the other direction. So creating a new code would probably be more work, but you know, I don't deal in these building codes that much, so I am certainly not the expert. And we will get our building official here to present some ideas for us eventually. But I just want to get your thoughts and see how we're feeling on moving forward with moving away from the green construction code and creating a new sustainable code.
So I have a question. And the alternatives, the three with the LEED, platinum, gold, silver, the B3, and the other, whatever the other one was, are those of the same, are they more or less, I don't want to say stringent, but as far as like how do they compare to the green code as far as what's required and what's entailed in buildings that meet, you know, either the green code, the existing green code, or one of these alternatives? Do you know?
That would be great research for an intern.
Okay, yeah, I think it is great research for an intern.
I do not, but maybe someone has some insights into that.
Or this may also be a question for the building inspector or
Absolutely.
building guy.
And, you know, they're trying to work with the state on pushing more restrictive energy codes, and, you know, what will that mean compared to these certifications? And, yeah, it's some good research that we should dig into.
Okay. Commissioner Miller?
Yeah, I actually really like these short, sweet policies, and I think that if we used the same measurable things that they did, that we would be, I'm going to use the word, it would behoove us. Because then we'd be able to compare ourselves and see what's working and what's not working with those things, but it would be really helpful if we used the same standards as they did, because like Ms. Finwell said, that the builders are already using those codes, they're familiar with them, or those guidelines. It's and I think we could make it more stringent if the green building code is stronger on some of these things. I don't see anything wrong with putting that in our policy, but I really do like this format that's so short and sweet, and it's, you know, it is up to the building people to be like, hey, we already have this certification, or we already go by this building code, or whatever, if it's just right up front like that instead of pages and pages, because, you know, being able to enforce it is a big deal, but this might be helpful for that as well.
Sorry.
Oh, boy, we'll fight it out.
Just out of curiosity, say that we did switch to more of just a basic lead certification, meeting those requirements, how would that look from like a staff verification side of things? Would that also be the building officials department to review and confirm that those requirements are being met, or how would that look?
I would assume, that the building official, verifies that it's meeting either silver, gold, or platinum based on whatever the energy code or whatever the requirements. But I see there's an architect in the room who could help us.
Yeah, I think so for instance, under Edina's example, each one of those options, they require that whatever option you pick, you certify it. And if you're certified, then that certification process will have its own certification process. Like if you're doing LEED, then you fill out all the LEED forms at certain design periods and after it's constructed, and illustrate to them that you've met whatever level you say you're designing to. And then if they believe that you've met it based on what you submit, then they certify it. So then the city would only have to just receive certification from whatever entity is certifying.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment and say I also think this is a good path to look into. I think the familiarity that a lot of the those in building and construction have with these other certification programs makes a lot of sense, and also I think I recall from in a previous meeting mentioning that most of the other cities in Minnesota have it within their green building codes, at least the ones that that you had researched, already require LEED certification or adopted in some way into the program. So I think that makes a lot of sense to look into that.
Sorry, just one little quick thought. Would it make sense that after some extra research by our by our intern is done, it might make sense to have like a subcommittee go through it and just kind of be like, hey, let's do this, because then we won't have to have her read every single thing again. I felt really bad for her. But it might, it might be helpful for people who are really into this and have this as their job, be a part of a subcommittee to kind of go through it and then bring it to the whole commission. Just a question.
Are you asking to lead a subcommittee?
Oh, just if we should have one or not.
Well,
What the thought is on that.
I don't think we're at that stage yet, but certainly,
I think it'd be nice to get the building officials in here just so we can if I suspect this will be what we discuss for the next few meetings at least. And so I guess maybe can we invite some of these building guys to come in and just talk about the codes? Either, I don't know if next month will be a good time or just at an upcoming meeting. Mm-hmm. That might be the next step.
yeah, Taylor, her internship ends Friday.
Oh, then you've got a lot of work to do before Friday.
So we might just need that subcommittee around the corner here. But I'd like to kind of narrow our focus before we bring the building official in.
Okay.
But yeah, that's absolutely a very important thing to do. And then having a subcommittee for once we start digging into kind of the details, I think is also a great idea.
Okay. Commissioner Edwards, did you have a question or comment?
I was just going to agree with Commissioner Redmond about the Edina. The Edina is pretty clear and it does seem to flow, and it just is it's a good example of one that I can understand.
Well, we've already looked at 2 examples of St. Paul and Edina, and maybe for next time, are there other cities besides St. Paul and Edina that we could review?
I've got there's at least one other city that I know has a pretty good standard, and it's Bloomington, Indiana.
Okay.
Theirs is a little bit more robust. So that's an answer to your question, and then I'm going to tag on it another statement, which is just, I mean, I agree. I think this is the right direction, this kind of a direction. The one thing that I would add to either St. Paul's or Edina's would be a little bit more explicit on exact GHG requirements. You know, Edina says, hey, we want you to do emissions predictions. Awesome. But I think we need to give them a target. You need to show us that what level you're at. And we can do that relatively easily. We could just take the SB 2030 energy goals out of the B3 guidelines, which already has a step down targets for different years. It's a little aggressive, but we could use that as a starting point at the very least, you know, and tweak it. But to me, the advantage of explicitly saying we want your emissions to target certain levels is that whatever they choose, they could use LEED, they could use you know, green business, whatever. But I don't care what you choose, you got to make sure that your emissions hit a goal, you know.
Have something measurable.
Yeah, explicitly around our climate goals, you know. And they could do that through, they could be an energy pig, but put solar and have enough solar to meet their energy needs, or they could reduce down their energy consumption, you know, or both.
So it sounds like you've got some ideas. Would you be willing to do a presentation on this at an upcoming meeting?
If there's something that would be helpful, yeah, I would, I would be. But I think actually we've got a pretty good, I mean, this is a great start, so,
Okay.
but I'm certainly happy to help in some way.
That doesn't take a lot of time.
Okay, well, thank you very much, staff. You've given us a lot to think about, a lot to discuss, and also a lot to look forward to working on.
Well, I'm excited.
I know.
Thank you so much for your time and attention to this.
And I also, I guess I want to give a big thank you to Taylor for putting together a lot of this information, and thank you for your work this summer. It's been great having you here, and I hope that it's been a good experience for you.
It has, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we can continue on then. Any new business? All right. Seeing none, and I'm not seeing any visitor presentations. Any commissioner presentations? Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Miller.
My kids and I were traveling some of the parks this past week and noticed that one of the parks that we used to frequent, and it was a while ago because my kids are older now, but we went kind of to go back for nostalgia, and it's really not being taken care of. Should we bring this to Parks and Rec, or?
Oh, no. Yes, please
Yeah.
email me and I'll,
Okay,
Share
because
the info.
it's really bad. In fact, we've been trying to volunteer and go over and fix it a little bit because it's kind of become a squatting place, which is not good, so. Thank you.
goodness.
Thank
not
you very-
good to hear.
Yep.
We have experienced a large volume of illegal dumping in our parks and just so much trash, and you know, ever since COVID, it's been really challenging to keep up with. But I'm not sure what park you're talking about or what the condition is, but absolutely, yeah, let me know and we'll address it.
Thank you.
And we do have an Adopt a Park program, if anyone is ever interested. It's a volunteer program where you would just agree to, you know, take a walk through the park every now and again and help clean up trash, or if you see anything, you know, contact us so we can take care of it, graffiti, anything like that. So that's a great program. We have a lot of residents participating in that.
Okay. Any other commissioner presentations or comments? All right. Well, and staff, go ahead.
Yes, one opportunity for some last outreach. We'll hope we can carry through with this. It's the August Celebrate Summer, and it is on Wednesday at Edgerton Park, next to Edgerton Elementary School. And it is from 6 until 7:30. And this is the summer celebrations, our park and rec, as well as other departments, our police, fire. We all participate in and do some community outreach. And there's food, there's hot dogs, chips, and there's all sorts of games, bouncy castles, things like that. And then several booths. And I think this last celebration, we also had a petting zoo. So, really draws a crowd. I don't know who that is. But, we hold the celebrations throughout the city at various parks. So this is at Edgerton Park. And, but unfortunately, we're hearing about this heat warning, so we might have to cancel that. But Taylor and I will be there if it's not canceled, and we'll do some climate mitigation outreach. And I'll send you an email if you want to join us. But we should know by noon tomorrow if it's canceled. So thank you.
Perhaps, Sean, would you mind just sending to all of us just sort of an update noon tomorrow, whether you think it's thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yeah, it's they're going to make the decision at noon.
Okay.
And so just how has attendance been at some of the other community events? Have people been coming out?
Taylor and I were at the July celebration, and because of the heat, it was like in the 90s. It wasn't quite as well
Okay.
attended. And then, did we go to the other one? It's been a long summer.
Long hot
there
summer.
were 3. Yeah.
National Night Out?
It's okay. No,
But
it's
they
okay.
usually are, and what you see are neighbors from that particular area, so that's always fun. It's great to, just walk to a park and go to a big city celebration like that.
Yeah. No, it's a great opportunity. All right. Well.
Light It Up event,
Ooh.
yeah, and that was huge. Well attended. Really?
Okay.
You must have had good food.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good time. Do we have a motion to? Are we ready to adjourn? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, we got a motion by Commissioner Miller. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Second by Commissioner Lakes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So it is 8:15, and we are actually. Well, let's say it's 8:16. We are good.